There we go. Yeah.
So without further ado, Lindsey and Loren, I'll pass it off to you.
All right. Well, I guess before I bring up my screen, we can introduce ourselves. I'm Lindsey Desmul. I work obviously for WDFW. I work a lot with the Sustainable Land Strategy and other groups to build trust and relationships to ensure that our estuary restoration projects in the North Puget Sound advance forward. Loren?
Hi, everyone. I'm Loren Brokaw. I also work with WDFW with Lindsey. I'm a restoration project coordinator within our region. So I work throughout the North Puget Sound, but this project is focused in on the lower Snohomish. It's one of the first projects I've worked on in this area. So I'm excited to kind of share what we have going with our partners on this project.
All right, so I will share my screen. And let me
Lindsey and
change.
Loren, you
Yep.
want questions as you go, or would you prefer to get all the way through and then take questions? And if so, just let me know.
I think let's go ahead and take questions at the end.
Okay, that'd be great. And if people can raise their hand, then that makes it easier for us to find the ones that would like to speak.
All right, perfect. Well, so I'm gonna start us off here. You can see this title slide says Snohomish Estuary Project Scoping. We had originally titled it Prioritization Process. So I apologize if you were lured here under false pretenses. We ended up changing that name somewhere along the line in this process, and we can talk about why we changed the name of the project a little further along. So I am going to give you guys just a really quick rundown of the Snohomish, why the estuary is important, and why we thought it was important to do this process right now. And then I'll hand it off to Loren, and he will go into more information about the specific project locations. So the Snohomish Delta is super important to Puget Sound. It is the second largest watershed. So it's encompasses a fairly large area. The Puget Sound Nearshore Ecosystem Restoration Project, boy, that's still a mouthful after 5 years, recommended that the Snohomish Delta as high priority restore area. That's the highest designation that can be given. It was only one of 2 deltas that was recommended for that. It pumps out a lot of coho in Puget Sound. 25 to 50% of coho come from the Snohomish watershed. And in 2015, it was designated as a resilient land and water by the Obama administration. So this is our estuary here, and you can see it is smack dab in the middle of a hugely populated area. We've got Everett, Snohomish, Lake Stevens. It's kind of right in the middle of the action, much like a lot of our deltas in Puget Sound. So this just shows really what the historic area used to look like in our estuary. And this is currently what it looks like. And this is up to date as of right now. Can you guys see my cursor? Yes. Okay. So this area right here, that's kind of the missing piece in here, that is Blue Heron. It's a mitigation site. That will be completed, I believe, next summer. But you can see we have quite a bit of work to do. This, our outline here is the diking system that is left in the Snohomish Estuary. So quite a bit of it is still diked to this day. This slide is just showing that the estuary is essentially broken up into different salinity levels. And those salinity levels create different habitat types for juvenile salmon that are moving downstream. You can see that down here in this area, this Euryhaline unvegetated area, we actually have a gain in habitat type, which is really exciting. But this area down here that is this oligohaline transition, it's a little less salty, a little more freshwater. We don't have any habitat left in that area for juvenile salmon. And so I think in the work that we're going to be pushing forward in the next, 10, 20 years, we're going to be focusing a lot up in the upper reaches of the estuary. So it's always kind of a dire topic to talk about salmon recovery because, it's not the happiest story. But I think in the face of it all, these guys are still here. We still have salmon in these systems. And so, frankly, there's always hope as long as they are still here. And so, it's on us to push forward these projects to help bring them back. So this is showing really how much work has been done in the last several years. All these in red here have been completed recently. So we have Clute, Mid-Spencer, Smith Island. This one here, like I mentioned before, will be complete next summer. These guys in the yellow are the ones we're going to be talking about today. So notice all of the projects we've really focused on previously have been in this lower part of the estuary. So we thought it was really important to start talking about which projects we were going to be doing in the future for a lot of different reasons. There was a lot of momentum in the estuary in pushing forward restoration projects. We attribute a lot of that success to the sustainable land strategy. It's really, really helpful to have this table where we can bring projects and talk through the difficulties of doing them and of different land use issues. And I think getting these restoration projects done would be a lot more difficult without the sustainable land strategy. There's also a heck of a lot of public land still in the river delta that we haven't done anything yet. And we have a lot of data in this estuary. So once Snohomish County finished Smith Island a couple years ago, we were kind of lost. We didn't have anything else on the docket to do, aside from, of course, that mitigation project that is going to be done. But these projects take a long time, 5 to 20 years. I mean, that's a career, one career's worth of time that we're talking about. So we really thought it was important to get that next project underway. So of course, that was our purpose for this process, was to queue up the next large restoration project. So these are the properties that we were considering. All of these have been talked about with restoration for probably the last 10 to 20 years. We have Spencer Island, the north tip of Eby Island, and Dyken District 6. We call it DD6. Snohomish County, who was a massive partner in this process, owns DD6, north tip of Eby, and the south half of Spencer Island. So we only own a little portion on the north part of Spencer. But all things considered, without any further acquisition, that's almost 1,000 acres of public land that we hope to push forward for restoration. So that is a huge footprint. And we also just wanted to point out that some of this habitat is in that oligohaline salinity level where we currently don't have any habitat for juvenile salmon. So again, the purpose of these meetings, we wanted to bring together kind of a wide variety of folks who have a stake in the land, have a stake in the infrastructure on these 3 properties, to build really broad support for that next large estuary restoration project. We wanted to pinpoint all of the kind of barriers of why these projects have just been sitting there for the last 20 years, why they haven't been done, what's been stopping us from kind of completing that next step. So we expected to create a prioritized list of projects. We did not end up prioritizing these. at our first meeting, I think it was a fairly unanimous decision when we considered all of these projects that we didn't want to prioritize them. We wanted to push every single one of them forward. And so that is the direction that we decided to take. And we expect to use the report that that we are currently writing to kind of help us secure funding and more support for feasibility and design to really push these guys across the finish line. Now, I wanted to mention these projects were part of a bigger package for funding. EB Island was a part of that package as well. We are hoping to create a management plan for WDFW's property on EB Island. We own about 1,200 acres out there. It was not considered for restoration amongst these other 3 projects for a lot of different reasons, primarily because we don't believe it is socially ready or economically ready for restoration at this point. So it's not to say we're not going to be talking about the possibility of restoration down the line, but it's going to be a long haul on EB. So we're really focusing that effort on things like increasing drainage infrastructure, helping out agriculture, increasing recreation, and potentially some wetland work out there. So this is a list of all the folks that we had in our advisory group to look at these 3 projects. We had City of Everett, NOAA, Snohomish County, the lead entity, the Tulalip and Snoqualmie tribes, Ducks Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy, WSDOT and Puget Sound Energy. And this was an interesting group of folks to bring together. You know, I think it really took all of us being in the same room to talk about these projects just because of the amount of infrastructure that's on these pieces of property that we're looking at. The Port of Everett decided not to participate in the meetings, but we are keeping them up to date with our report. So we had 3 meetings altogether. Our first meeting started in December of 2020. And that was really just kind of putting all of our cards on the table. What are all these properties about? What's the infrastructure that's on them? What's the feasibility that's been done in the past? Because like I said, all of these projects have been looked at for restoration in the past. The second meeting was really about kind of developing shared goals, looking at those barriers and solutions to restoration on these properties. And then the third meeting was really about, well, did we get it right? Are we missing anything? That kind of thing. So we hired Triangle Consulting to help us with this process. They wrote up a draft report, and Loren and I are currently going through that with the help of folks at Snohomish County to really kind of fine tune that report. We expect to have a draft out to, I think, the broader community probably in the next month. So now I guess I will stop sharing and I will let Loren take over, and he's going to go through more of the details of each individual project.
All right, thanks, Lindsey. I'll pull up my screen here. Okay, can you see my screen? Great. All right, so I'll spend some time walking through the 3 individual project areas that we looked at. I'll kind of go through the basics of what those properties are like now. I'll go over what different restoration scenarios we've looked at in the past and currently. Then I'll talk about what our advisory group discussed. And then for each of these 3 projects, I have kind of a more recent update from the last few months about where they currently sit. And there's some exciting news about a couple of them. So the first one I'll talk about is our Spencer Island site. It's 313 acres in size within the dike footprint that used to be there. This property historically was river delta habitat, but dikes were built many, many years ago, but it does have a restoration history. It was the first project of its kind that I know of in Puget Sound where we intentionally breached dikes for salmon habitat. And that was done on the south end of the island, which is owned by Snohomish County, over 20 years ago. Some of the dikes have failed on the northern portion of the property. And so now the entirety of the property is intertidal, but the openings that lets the tides in are undersized. So those tidal processes are muted currently. And another important thing to know about the site is there is a popular walking trail used especially on the south end by all sorts of recreators, bird watchers, and on the north portion of the property, we also allow hunting. So the current restoration concept, keeping in mind that the site is already intertidal, the goal is to improve connectivity of the interior of the site with the surrounding marsh, while also maintaining walking access for that popular trail. This project that's shown on the screen here is a conceptual design completed as part of the Puget Sound Nearshore Ecosystem Restoration Project, PSNERP. This was done about 10 years ago, and it's, again, conceptual in nature. So as we pick up this design moving forward, we'll take another look at this conceptual design and fine tune it before deciding what features are absolutely necessary. Department of Fish and Wildlife has had funding in hand to begin doing design for a number of years. However, we've been waiting for the federal portion of the cost share to arrive before moving forward. And so as an advisory group, one of the first things we established was, even though the site is currently intertidal, it is still an important project that we should pursue. However, it's important that we learn from other projects that are similar to it to think about what sorts of design features are effective and also cost efficient. So really kind of bringing in the local group of restoration practitioners to help us think through the individual design elements. And there was also a desire amongst the group to use the WDFW funds that are already in hand. Those are capital budget funds that have already been issued. And so it's not taking from any restoration funding source to use those funds. So we might as well do what we can to use those. And so that's kind of where we left it as an advisory group, is prioritizing this project as important and to keep trying to push it forward. Just recently, well, several months ago, using that information, we requested the federal cost share again from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And our thought was to kind of give that a last ditch effort to see if those federal funds arrived before pursuing another funding strategy. Well, it turned out that last request seems to have been effective. And there's now a $5 million amount included in the Senate's Energy and Water Development Appropriations Bill. That hasn't been passed yet, but it needs to be passed by early December. And so there's still some question of whether or not those funds will actually arrive. But the fact that it's included in the bill, it makes us hopeful. And we just learned this morning, actually, that there's a separate federal funding pathway that Spencer Island is included in. And so we're thinking of that as our backup plan. And it's important to note this $5 million number is a really big number. The way the project would work is we would enter into an agreement with the Corps that would only be focused on design first. And so we would have two separate agreements. First, we would agree to enter into design with the Corps. And then if we end up with a project that we think is a good project and is feasible and cost effective, then we'll enter into the construction phase. So that's the news on Spencer Island. Now I'll move to the DD6 property. And I keep thinking we need to think about renaming the DD6 property because DD6 is no longer an entity, but we still call it DD6. And the basics about this property is that the county owns 350 acres. That's shown within this yellow footprint, and you can kind of see the individual parcel lines. A really important thing to know about this property is major utilities run across it. You can see these yellow dots are Puget Sound Energy transmission poles. This solid blue line is an City of Everett water main. It's a 52-inch diameter pipe that's a major water pipeline for the city. It also has a popular walking trail that's shown in this green outline. And it has a dike intact right along the river. However, the site itself inside of the dike is very wet, and that's due to failing infrastructure. There's leaky tide gates, that sort of thing. And so various restoration scenarios have been considered throughout the last many years. I mean, we have reports dating back from the 90s, and then a more recent report done by the city of Everett. And there are kind of three main scenarios that people have thought of for restoration. Scenario one includes restoring about 280 acres of the county site. That scenario wouldn't involve needing to move the city of Everett pipeline. Another scenario that's been considered is, in the scenario one, a cross dike would be built in a short portion, in the shortest possible alignment where that cross dike would need it to be. Another potential scenario is restoring a larger portion of the county property, 350 acres in total. And again, a cross dike would be built with this alignment. And in this scenario, the pipeline would need to be moved. A third kind of hypothetical scenario to absolutely maximize the benefit on the site for salmon restoration would be to acquire some land that is currently private, shown in green here. And that would allow a larger footprint to be restored. It would also involve moving the pipeline. And it may also consider doing something with this line shown in red here, that's an Olympic pipeline. And yeah, the footprint, the private property owned in green wouldn't be purchased unless there's a willing seller there. And we don't know at this time what that case may be. And so what our advisory group discussed is, I mean, yeah, this project is very important. It falls right within that oligohaline zone that Lindsey mentioned. Another important thing that we established and talked about in our advisory group is the city of Everett was very willing to think about partnering with us on moving that pipeline should the project require it. It's good to know, though, that moving that pipeline would be a very expensive project element. Their current estimate, just based on linear footage, is about $20 million. And so if we were to move forward with a project that involved moving the pipeline, it would likely put us outside of our typical salmon funding arrangement, and we would need to bring in other sources of funds to cover those costs. Also, talking with Puget Sound Energy through this process, we learned that a project exposing the power lines, the utility poles to the tides likely won't be a problem, but more information would be needed in the next project phase before them being able to decide that for sure. There are also some questions about easements the county may have on some of these properties. And so we went ahead and completed a title report to give the county more information as to what sorts of restoration scenarios may cause issues with easements on properties. And so since we've met with the advisory group, we've formed a kind of a smaller DD6 focus group of entities that are really interested in this potential project. And so we've had a couple of good meetings talking specifically about different things on this project. The county just recently has provided some funding to move forward in this project. And I don't know all of the details about that. So in the question and answer period, maybe there'll be more information to share. We're going to shortly do an assessment of whether or not there are willing landowners within the green footprint. And if whether that answer, yes or no, will help us decide which project track to go on in early 2022 to begin feasibility, either of a project that includes a really big footprint or a project that's a bit smaller that only includes publicly owned properties. The next project site we looked at was one on the north tip of EB Island. The county currently owns 183 acres that is shown in this dark blue footprint on the map. This is, of our 3 sites, this is the only site that has diking infrastructure that's controlled by an entity that's not us, a dike and drainage district. So that's important to know. That's true for this property as well as WDFW's ownership on EB Island. Is the dike and drainage infrastructure is controlled by another entity. So any project we would be able to do would need to work in partnership with that entity. And so on this North EB project, we've known in the past, this was over 10 years ago, that dike district did express a willingness to partner on and consider a dike setback project. And so as an advisory group, what we talked about is, a project here is likely important, but of the 3 sites, the least is known about the habitat potential on this site. And so if we were to move forward with feasibility work on doing a project here, it would likely be starting at an earlier point in feasibility than the other 2 projects. We also talked about, there have been various footprints discussed on this project as well, some of which are exclusively on land that's owned by the county now, and others increasing in size, just hypothetically envisioning a land acquisition in the future. And then the most recent update on this North EB project is we recently talked to the Dike District again, and they have again expressed a willingness to talk with us and partner on a feasibility project to move this project forward as well. So that's kind of my summary of these 3 individual projects. Because I'm presenting, I'm probably making it sound like WDFW is doing all of this, but that's definitely not the case. We just used a grant from the Estuary and Salmon Restoration Program and NOAA to convene these conversations with partners. And WDFW owns just a small portion of Spencer Island. And the reality is the county owns the majority of this. And so a lot of credit, I think, needs to go to the county for helping us through these conversations, and hopefully we'll continue working together if we can push any of these to the next phase. Lindsey mentioned that there's a report we're developing, and again, it's in draft form right now. We're really close to being able to release it for another round of edits and then finalizing it, and we hope to use it as a tool for us to get funding to move these projects to the next phase. And I believe this is my last slide, and it shows, those overall project footprints. So it's probably good to stop here and go to questions.
So feel free to enter questions into the chat or raise your hand, and we'll open up the floor for your question. Great. Well, Kurt.
The conceptual design for Spencer Island, have you gotten to the point of what kind of vegetative community that would be the objective or goal for that area?
We haven't gotten to that level of design or consideration. I mean, what you saw on the screen there as the PISNERP design is as far as developed as it is now. And so if we do move to the next phase with the core, one of the first things we'll need to do is, scope out, I think, project goals such as that.
I think the more scrub shrub vegetative type or forest type you can establish there, the better. Then on the Dike District 6, why it's been in limbo for so long are the utilities and that are present, and I don't see, I guess, continue to see that as a problem there that really hasn't been resolved. So I think that one is, from my perspective, at least from what I've seen thus far, is still going to be difficult to implement without substantial sums of money and agreement that has always been a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. For two of those three scenarios, moving that pipeline would be an expense, an infrastructure expense that is one that is not typically funded through our traditional funding means on restoration projects. But you know, that pipeline has a 100-year lifespan, about 50 years of it. It's about 50 years old, so it still has a somewhat significant lifespan. But we learned through this process that there's some earthquake retrofitting, some seismic retrofitting that needs to be done. And so there is some cost that the city is already planning on needing to address on that pipeline in the more near future. And so, I mean, yeah, $20 million is a ton of money, and there may be some lifespan to it left, but I think if we consider this project as a combination of a salmon project and an infrastructure project, I'm hoping that we can kind of unravel some additional colors of money that we don't always see in our salmon projects. So that's my hope. Maybe it's naive, but I think several of us are feeling some hope that other projects like this have been done in the Sound that have been more than salmon projects, and money has come from other sources. So we'll just, yeah, we plan on exploring that.
I think the future of DD6 also really depends on what happens, like how the adjacent landowner is feeling about potentially selling to Snohomish County. Because if they're, you know, if they're just really not interested and they're putting their hands up and saying no, I think it's really worth considering. Do we want to take that smaller footprint and make this an easier project and not move the pipeline? Or is it really worth how much, what kind of benefit do we get from expanding that and moving the pipeline? You know, those are the kind of questions we're going to have to grapple with when it comes down to it.
Great. Jay, you're up next. You are still muted.
How's that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I got mutes. I got to press all over the place. Great presentation, you guys. Thank you. One question I have, or I guess two questions I have is, I'm glad to see that Josh Chamberlain was on there because of some of the recent research around the importance of connectivity to the main stem for salmon, and also the need for, as you talked about, that particular habitat type within a mosaic of habitat needs within the estuary. I guess I want to just see if there's anything else you want to say about that. And then the other question I have is around flood benefit or potential flood benefit. Are there any hypotheses that the group had talked about regarding that?
I guess I haven't seen if Josh is actually on here. It looks like he isn't. Yeah, his research that he's been working on has lined up really nicely with this project. And I don't think his research is complete, but when it is, we plan to probably create an addendum to our report to incorporate some of his findings. Essentially, what the gist of it is that the further up in the estuary you are, so the further upstream you are, the less branching the salmon have to get through. And so, you know, when there is that branching, salmon kind of split up and go their different ways. So restored habitat that's further upstream with less of that branching actually has much more density dependence on it from juvenile salmon. So salmon can really pack in there more so than they can in some of those spots in the lower estuary, which I think further contributes to the fact that we're going to need to start focusing more upstream in our restoration in the future.
And we
As far as
also,
flood impact, I'm not sure.
yeah, I'll also say we, in our last conversation with Josh, which has been a few months, so we probably need to check back in with him, but we talked about kind of reconnecting in the next phase of the projects, whatever of the 3 projects that may be. It might be all 3, it might be 1 or 2, working with him to really figure out what sorts of combinations of those 3 projects and what types of channel features and things like that we could build into them to maximize the benefit to Chinook. And so we don't have that fine enough of information yet, but we certainly plan on continuing to work with him.
Kurt,
Thanks, guys.
Lindsey, I would describe it slightly differently.
Mm.
Josh's research basically was putting a lot of emphasis on the interconnectedness of the system. So you've got a lot of juvenile salmon coming down the main stem, and the most utilization is in the main stem and the first bifurcation. So that would be like EB Slough. So it's more of an interconnectedness with that first main stem that is critical. So did Josh weigh in on the prioritization? If there was a prioritization, I guess you guys decided not to prioritize, but I would guess based on just the interconnectedness, the Dike District 6 would be higher in terms of priority from the interconnectedness basis than the other 2, I think. So
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. DD6 is most connected to the main stem compared to the other projects downstream. So that is true. But Josh in the process I don't think had a strong opinion on, that project should move forward at the expense of the other 2. I mean, the general consensus was that all 3 projects have some minor hurdles they need to get over, but do them all.
Can I chime in just to agree with that, Loren? Josh was a little non-committal on that front, but at the same time, the connectivity issue, we all agreed that DD6 is the closest to the main stem, and therefore, just by default, could see more salmon get to it. So it certainly jumped up on the list without, a formal, to say that's our number 1 project. We didn't go that far, but because it really expands the restoration footprint farther up into the estuary, it's important. Josh would agree with that, I think. The other next step with Josh is to, like Loren said, start to really draw out what those channels at DD6 could look like. And then, he's got new equations for estimating density within those sites. So we could kind of come up with a ballpark figure for how many fish we would expect to see there.
And thank you, Kurt. You put that much more eloquently than I did.
Greg.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that Snohomish County is likewise very interested in moving that DD6 project forward, and so I appreciate the presentation you guys gave today and the work that kind of went into this. and I know swim staff have been involved in that as well, the county staff have, but yeah, I just, to give a little more specifics on that, the county recently sold property and we're trying to figure out how to use some of those funds. And we put a plug in for setting aside some of those, at least for moving the DD6 project forward. And so tentatively, we have $2 million of those funds set aside for that purpose to try to move that project kind of towards the next phase and the next stage. And surface water management also has funds that we've been looking at, our own funds that we're looking at for that same purpose. So we're very interested in I guess figuring out what the next steps are to get this project moving forward. And yeah, we know there's a lot of hurdles, particularly with these huge pipelines sitting there. And we also are in the process of hiring a temporary staff person. And you mentioned that in a bullet on one of your slides about just looking at property acquisition, kind of the last pieces, if there is any even willing property seller or not. So we're trying to move that ball forward. It's just at least see where it goes. But anyway, so very supportive of and would love to continue partnering on this.
Great, thank you, Greg. That's such great news.
Any other questions for Lindsey and Loren?
Got out of another meeting and just signed in. Do I assume we are talking about EB Slough restoration in the old Drainage District 6 at the moment?
Mhm.
And if so, what questions did you have about pipelines that I heard Greg talking about?
Well, there's a major City of Everett water main running through the site. There's also an Olympic pipeline.
There's
And there's
two of
also,
them.
and there's also a Puget Sound Energy kind of major transmission lines running through the site. And so
22
we
years
identified
ago,
that
this
as a
was my
major,
first project.
so we identified that as a major consideration we'll need to take into account if we move into the feasibility stage of that project. And so we know about them and have been working with the utility owners in this last project planning phase, and we'll continue working closely with them as this project develops.
Okay. As I said, sorry to interrupt, 22 years ago was my first project. PSC rebuilt their line to accept anything that the climate change will throw at it. Olympic Pipeline buried their second line, so they had no issues with flooding over the top of it. City of Everett water line is a interesting development, and what do we do with that? So happy to be a resource.
Can I ask who this is? I just see Dave.
Dave Lucas, I worked for Snohomish County Surface Water Management.
Got
I
it.
said that was my first project when I came to the county 22 years ago.
Great, thank you.
It sounds like
Yeah.
you're revisiting a lot of the things we already looked at.
Yeah, Dave, you probably missed it when we said City of Everett is actually very willing to discuss moving that water main. So we're slowly chipping away at it.
But it's getting closer and closer to its design life. And so for them, it's starting to look like a reasonable choice. 22 years ago, there was still a whole lot of design life left, and they were not as willing to take a look at it at that time.
Kurt,
Dave, do you remember back in about 2000, maybe 2009, the Corps wanted to do took on DD6, and I thought did they ever get around to writing up a feasibility report study on DD6? And in that, they would have had alternatives and looked at other things. Do you know if they ever got to that?
I never saw anything about that. And currently we've kept it out of any core program like PL 8499. So for them to have a plan for it, other than talking to the county if we wanted to maintain it being there if it got damaged until we can create a restoration project, that's about all I know of from the Corps.
Well, if they would have done it, it would have been done under the same, section 544. Just like the Coolute. They went from the Coolute project to DD6 as the next project, and they started to have meetings, and I got too involved with what I had to do, and I never followed up on it. So.
City of Everett brought them in on their 544 program because they thought it would be a great money saver, and it turned out not to be. And so they just stopped the program and stopped working with the Corps. But they were going to have the Corps come in and do a complete design for them. Didn't work out.
Any final questions? Oh,
This is a little history others didn't know about.
Yeah. This is probably on the record, so I'll say that the Corps in those programs has a habit of changing project managers every year and starting over at ground zero. And the city of Everett found that out, and it just didn't work out well for them.
That's kind of also a beware on if you want to have the Corps to do the rest of Spencer Island. So.
Correct.
So the two reports we have, Dave, on DD6 are a 2000 report from the county, and then a more recent report. I don't remember the year, but it's maybe 10 years old, from City of Everett, authored by AMEC. Do those sound familiar?
Correct.
And are there any others that are older that we might be missing that you can think of?
There's the 1996 restoration plan as well. I don't know if that's the 2001 or if there was an update after that.
That's probably the one that Lauren's thinking of.
Yeah, the date on it that I have from the county is 2000, but maybe that's an updated version of that one. I'm not sure.
There's some work by URS, and I'm trying to remember the engineer's name who used to work for the Conservation District. Not remembering it, but they did some preliminary design work and came up with a preliminary estimate for what it would cost to finish design and build a cross levee kind of along the same alignment that the county had from the 2000 report. I've got a copy of that.
Okay.
I can certainly forward along.
Yeah, I don't think I have that one.
so
Dave, actually, if you don't mind, sorry, my mute was on. I don't think Dave was on, Loren, when you mentioned that you recently completed a tidal report on all of the ownerships, but
Yep.
Dave would be very interested in getting a copy of that. He is
Okay.
bringing a former county property management person back part-time to help us sort of refamiliarize ourselves with the real estate holdings, as well as approach one of the adjacent landowners.
Yeah, I'd be happy to forward that along. I think, yeah, the folks that were part of our planning project have it, but I'm sure I have your email address, Dave, so I'll forward it directly to you as well.
Great, thank you.
Yep.